Good afternoon. My name is Ray Thompson. I'm a 27-year retired active duty Army officer. I was asked to speak to you today about why I decided to join the military. In order for me to let you know that, I need to take you back to 1987. You see, in 1987, I am one of 8 children born to a mother in the inner cities of Chicago. My biological father passed away before I was born, and I had a stepfather. And one thing I could say about my stepfather is he was my stepfather. However, he was very instrumental to me going into the military, and I'll explain that to you a little bit later. Now, growing up in the inner cities of Chicago, trust me, back then in '87, it was filled with drugs, violence, all that good stuff. And me going to high school was a task, and this is why. I went to 4 different high schools to get 1 high school diploma. My first high school, I got into a little trouble early on, and they told me with no uncertain terms, do not come back here. My second high school, it was like 75 days in a semester. I think I missed like 48. My third high school, I liked that one because that high school, it was at night. I go to school for a few hours, get credit for a whole day. I like that one. But my last high school was summer school. I graduated out of summer school. It was August of 1987. I'll never forget that day. It was hot. It was boiling hot outside. My mother was the only one that came to my high school graduation. I think she was a little bit teed off because she had to take half a day off to come to my graduation. Nevertheless, it was her and I, and we were walking, all the people, the ceremony was over. My mom was on my right side. I'll never forget this day. As we were walking out, I was proud. I was like, hey, I graduated out of high school. I'm on my way. My mother and I have never had a conversation about what life would be like after high school. So here's the gut punch. As we were walking, my mom was on my right side. She turned me in her direction and she said, so what's your plan? At that time, I was working down the street at Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I looked at my mother and I said, I think I'm gonna stay down here at KFC and make this chicken. My mother stopped just like that, pointed her finger directly in my face, and she said, either you go to college or get out of my house. In my mind, I'm thinking, did you not see what the last 4 years have just yielded? It reminded me of a poem by Robert Frost, and the poem is called The Road Not Taken. The very last stanza of that poem, Robert Frost wrote, I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, 2 roads diverge in the woods, and I chose the path less traveled by, and it has made all the difference. To me, that was my 2 roads. That one question led me in 2 different directions. Growing up in the inner city of Chicago, I knew in my mind, I had to get out of there. I had to get out of there. I just didn't know how. So weeks had passed. I was making that chicken. And I went past an Army recruiting station. And I just remember the conversation that my stepfather had years earlier about how the military be good. You go to school, blah, blah, blah. They got benefits. So I stopped in and it changed my life. I took the pre-ASVAB test, which is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. And then I went on to take the ASVAB test and I passed. I'm going to the military. But I had one problem I forgot to tell you about. I had been to jail about 4 or 5 times before I graduated out of high school. So I had some pending actions that needed to be addressed, like probation. So my recruiter and I had to petition the court to see a judge in order for me to get my probation dropped so that I can go into the Army. So we petitioned the court clerk. We got on the docket a couple of weeks later, and we went to court. And I thought that we'll just be in court just for a little bit, but it turned out we sat through the morning docket. That's where all the violent criminals were. I mean, that's where the action really happened, in the morning docket. Then we sat through the afternoon docket. He and I we were the very last 2 to be left that day. And the judge sitting behind the bench and the court clerk and some other people were in the courtroom, looked out at the audience, and it was only me and my recruiter. He said, what are you here for? And I jumped up and I said, Your Honor, I need to get my probation dropped so I can go to the Army. And he looked at me strangely, and my recruiter stood up and said, "Yes, sir, Your Honor. We petitioned the court. Mr. Thompson would like to get his probation dropped because he would like to go into the service." And the judge threw his hand up and said, "Come forward." We walked to the front of the courtroom, stood behind one of the two tables. I can't tell you which one. And he said, "So you would like to go to the Army?" And I said, "Yes, sir, Your Honor. I'd like to go to the Army." And he said to the court clerk passed him my file, and he just started writing. And then he wrote for a while, and then he looked up at me and he said, "You know what I was writing?" And I said, "I have the slightest idea." He said, "I'm writing the order to drop your probation, but this is what I want you to know. I'm also writing that, Mr. Thompson, if you get into any trouble whatsoever, you get a traffic ticket, you got to come back and see me. And I'm writing right here that you told me you were going to the Army and you did not. And now that will change things from that point on. Do you understand me?" And I said, "Yes, sir." So I joined the Army. I left for the Army October 15, 1987. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I came in the Army as an E1, no rank on my collar or anything. But from that point, my life changed. I have been involved in every conflict this nation has been involved in since 1987. I fought in the first Gulf War. I went on to support the actions in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I have been to Iraq several different times, even in this current conflict where I was doing convoy escorts. I've also supported operations in Afghanistan. I've been to UAE, Dubai. I've lived in Germany for 5 years. Mein Deutsch ist nicht sehr gut. I've also lived in Korea for 2 years where I was stationed. And I always knew that something had to be better than where I was. And if it were not for 3 people in my life, 3 people, my mother, my stepfather, and a judge, I don't know where I would be. And here I am as a retired Army officer. And I thank you for listening to my story.